And you are all set.
Okay, we appreciate your assistance. Good morning, everyone. I'd like to call the September 30th, 2021 meeting of the Finance Administration Committee meeting to order. I will note for the record that I see Councilor Sweeney, Councilor Fay, and I believe Mayor Cantor are joining us via telephone, I think. This morning.
Yeah. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. I appreciate everyone waking up early on this Thursday morning and participating in the discussion as much as possible, understanding everyone has a lot going on right now. The first item of business is the acceptance of the minutes of the 8/3/2021 meeting. I don't know if anyone had any objection to the minutes as presented.
I'd second that if needed, Leon.
Thank you, Liam. Seeing no to accept the minutes as presented. So without it being received. The next item is probably one of the more significant items, Mr. Manager, for today's discussion, which is recommendations for the use of the American Rescue Plan funding. So I'll turn it over to you and to whoever else you believe would be necessary to engage the committee in discussion.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, everyone. Matt Hart, Town Manager. Good to see you all online. Joining me today for this portion of the agenda, we have Peter Privatera, our Director of Financial Services, and Patty Lewis, our Budget and Grants Manager. So today we have an initial presentation that we're very excited to make to the committee regarding the use of a substantial portion of the rescue plan funds that the town is receiving. We understand you're seeing this for the first time, and undoubtedly we'll want to spend at least a couple of meetings with it. So what we have loaded on board docs, we have a spreadsheet that lists our recommendations as well as an accompanying narrative. I also have a PowerPoint presentation, which we will load following this meeting. Bringing that up now. Everyone see that okay? Looks like we can. So let me proceed. As committee members will recall, the town has been awarded a significant sum of money under the Rescue Plan Act watershed legislation proposed by the administration and passed by Congress. As a refresher, the town is receiving a little over $25 million in 2 tranches. All of these are awarded in 2 tranches. So we received the first half on May 19th, and we will receive the second half, we're expecting, in May of 2022. So a little over $25 million for the town, and then a county-based share, because Connecticut is one of 2 states without counties, at approximately $12.2 million. And then roughly another $10 to $11 million for the school district, which the Board of Ed and the administration have programmed. And you will recall that the council must obligate the money, the use of the money. It doesn't have to be spent, but it has to be obligated by December 31st, 2024. It needs to be expended 2 years later, by December 31st of 2026. And we do have to provide quarterly reporting. Ms. Lewis is taking the lead on that, starting at the end of October. And you will recall the town has already committed approximately $4.1 million as general fund revenue for the fiscal year we're in now. So what work has the staff done to date in order to develop this proposal for your consideration? So we've worked to develop a list of recommended town projects. Our goals, I'll be able to explain that in a moment or two, our thinking as we put the projects together, but it is consistent with the broad goals and objectives that we outlined for the council during this past budget season. We also verified whether or not the proposed expenditures would be allowable. Secondly, we've talked about proposed grants, loans, some type of assistance, some type of meaningful assistance to small businesses and nonprofit organizations located here in West Hartford. And related to that point, we've developed some draft FAQs as well as a draft grant loan assistance application that a business or a nonprofit entity could use. Moving on, just a little bit of a refresher again. What are the eligible uses for a municipality? You know, there are some restrictions. It's not wide open. So number one, we can certainly use the money to respond to the public health emergency, the negative economic impacts associated with that, such as revenue loss. You know, that drove the use of the $4.1 million in the current year. We can also utilize the money for premium pay for eligible workers who are performing essential work during the emergency. Number three, and this gets at the point we just made, we can utilize the funding to provide and fund programs and services to the extent to which it's making up for a reduction in revenue in the previous fiscal year. And then last but certainly not least, and this is a very important one for a town like West Hartford, we can utilize the funding to make investments in water, sewer, broadband infrastructure, and that would include stormwater and drainage projects. So moving on to our proposal for your consideration. You know, it's going to be hard to see this all on the screen, but you can pull it up. You'll find the documents already loaded in board docs. So the way this spreadsheet is organized is we have the respective department listed here on the left, everything from community development to the town manager's office, a very brief description of the project in the next column, our recommendations regarding the amount, the proposed funding source, whether it's rescue plan monies or bond monies, and then to what extent do we think the project would further the guiding principles that we discussed with the council during the last budget season. And let me just hit on some of the examples. One would be a project to promote economic vitality and livability here in our town. A second broad category is sustainability. A third is something that would promote customer service and operational improvements, make us better at what we do. A fourth would be budget relief, a budget relief category. Public health and safety is another category, very, very important. Diversity, equity, and inclusion. And that's the last major category here. I would also note that I did have an opportunity at various times throughout this process to consult with the mayor, and she provided us with a lot of valuable feedback. Now, you will note that our proposal for the use of rescue plan monies totals approximately $18.8 million. Then we have another $6.6 million identified in bond funding. So what is all that about? Recall, we've discussed this a few times with the council. You know, we understand your goal, your intent. We want to utilize this funding to the extent we can to finance projects and initiatives that are going to have long-lasting impact and staying power for our community. You know, we may never see an opportunity like this again, or it could be several years. We don't know, but we do not want to squander. You do not want to squander this opportunity. So we took that direction very, very seriously. And there are a number of projects that we would like to fund. We think are in general in spirit with the law, but may not fit the categories specifically. So what we would propose to do, and those examples are down below, such as the Eisenhower Pool, such as a building out and enhancing the Hillcrest Neighborhood Outreach Center, building out charging stations for electric vehicles across town, a project to upgrade our waste and recycling transfer station. All great projects in our mind that are in keeping with the goals that we've set. So the way we would fund those is we would back into a project. Recall, we've discussed this concept before. What do we mean? What we mean by that is, as you know, we have a very robust capital improvement program. The primary funding source we use is municipal bonds. So what we could do, what we can do, what we're proposing here is that we fund certain projects with rescue plan monies that are already programmed into the capital improvement program with bonding as the funding source. A couple of examples: flood mitigation infrastructure improvements at $5 million. Another example would be the body cameras for the police department at approximately $1 million. Those are already built into the capital improvement program, and they clearly qualify for rescue plan funding. So what we are proposing here is that we change the funding source and we fund those projects with rescue plan monies. That will in turn free up bond capacity in the capital improvement program that we can use for these other important initiatives at the bottom of the page. All right, so that is the backing into a project concept that we have discussed to some extent with council in the past. So I'm not going to read each and every one of these. I would ask you to do that, but let me touch on some examples. First of all, under community development, we're proposing a very comprehensive project in town center that would allow us to upgrade all of the infrastructure. As you know, our sidewalks are old. We have some accessibility issues, tree wells. We need to replace trees, etc. We would like to be able to install, and this was a great idea coming from the mayor, retractable bollards on both ends of LaSalle so that we can easily close that section of the road for events. We want to do the same thing in a portion of Blueback Square. We'd like to locate a public restroom in town center. We'd like to expand the sidewalks, make the sidewalks wider so that we can make outdoor dining more permanent. We can widen the sidewalks and narrow the travel lanes through much of town center. And we've seen over the last 2 summers how outdoor dining has really added to our vitality. So that's one example at $3 million there. A couple of other things I would highlight and treat these very much as plug numbers for right now, as very rough estimates. One would be assistance to 2 categories of nonprofit entities that are located here in West Hartford. One would be assistance to arts and cultural institutions. The second would be a whole category of nonprofits that support human services. And I will touch on the allowable uses in a slide or 2 from now. A second and related, and we've slotted that right now at $1 million. At $1 million. Again, that is a rough estimate for purposes of this conversation. Secondly, would be assistance to small businesses located here in West Hartford. So those are a couple of other examples I wanted to highlight for you. Just a few more. A variety of public safety equipment that could be utilized by the fire department, emergency management, health district, police, etc. Things that would enable us, equipment we could use for emergency shelters, equipment we can utilize to benefit persons with disabilities. A couple of other examples I would highlight here. In leisure and social services, a variety of improvements we could utilize to promote accessibility in our parks for persons with disabilities. a variety of initiatives we could also utilize to promote sustainability in our parks, looking at landscape improvements, et cetera, as well as park and playground enhancements. How can we utilize some of this money to upgrade our existing playgrounds, make them more accessible? So those are just a few examples I wanted to highlight. I already talked about some of the proposed projects for bond funding, and I would encourage you to review this list at your leisure, and we could discuss it in a more complete manner at your next meeting. Moving on to talk more specifically about small business and nonprofit associations. So the interim final rule for small businesses and nonprofit organizations does allow a municipal government to provide certain types of assistance, including loans, grants, in-kind assistance, technical assistance, other services that respond to the impacts of the pandemic. Let's drill down a little bit further. What are we talking about there? Number one would be relief, COVID-related relief, similar to what these organizations were eligible to receive under the federal PPE grant. However, one very important clarification there is that a nonprofit or a business entity could not apply for a loss that they have already received reimbursement for from the PPE or another source. So in other words, an organization or business would not be able to double dip from this funding source. But the extent to which they have incurred losses related to the pandemic that have not already been reimbursed at the federal or state government level, they could apply to this funding source. A second major category would be new programs and initiatives that are responsive to the pandemic. For example, think of the human services field, projects, initiatives that a nonprofit has developed to support elements of our community that have been most significantly impacted by the pandemic, whether it's mental health, food security, what have you. A third major category that we have talked about would be some type of matching grant. Could the town provide a matching grant to a nonprofit or to a business entity that would help finance a project that is eligible under the grant criteria? A good example would be HVAC or an air quality project. Let's think of a theater that wants to upgrade its HVAC system as an example, or a nonprofit entity. And then we have this other category, for more creative ideas for initiatives that are responsive to the pandemic. So just taking these a little bit further, and I already touched on the examples to some extent. The COVID relief bucket, again, someone would have to demonstrate a financial hardship. They could also utilize it for new safety measures that are responsive to the pandemic, technical assistance, counseling, et cetera, as well as premium pay. But again, they cannot double dip. They could not apply for something they've already been reimbursed for. Improving new programs, some examples could be improvements to data or technology infrastructure, impact evaluations, data analysis. The matching grant, I already listed a few examples of what we're contemplating there. Number one being an HVAC or air quality initiative. And then what would fall into the other category to help fund programs that would provide food, housing, other types that would address other types of financial insecurity for low and moderate income families, as well as initiatives that would support programs for children for families that have been disproportionately impacted. So where would we propose to go from here with respect to the proposed assistance for the nonprofit and business community? What we would recommend, with your blessing, is that town staff would conduct an engagement effort. We would like to hold virtual public forums or focus groups with both stakeholder groups. We'd like to meet with the small business community a couple of times. We'd like to meet with the arts and cultural community a couple of times, the human services community a couple of times, so that we can talk about what we're contemplating, but perhaps more importantly, get their feedback and input. Are our examples meaningful to them? What other creative ideas do they have that would be an allowable use of the funding? So we would get that input and feedback from them. We would also conduct some type of digital survey. We would package all that up and report back to this committee for your refinement. Once we are comfortable with the proposed use of the funding, and I forgot to point out at the beginning, but I'm sure you picked up on it, we're not proposing to utilize all of the funding at this point in time, 18 to 19 million of it, realizing that we've got some time to come still in the pandemic, and you would want to retain some flexibility regarding the use of the balance of the funding. But once we come to an agreement regarding the proposed initial uses, we would finalize the criteria we have set for the assistance process and determine whether or not we're going to use some type of review committee, etc. And then once that is completely ready to go, we would prepare and conduct an outreach program to all the potential applicants in the small business and nonprofit community. So those are our proposed next steps for those sectors of our community that have been negatively impacted by the pandemic. That completes my short presentation. I know it was a lot in a short amount of time. We've already posted some good documents online. Again, would encourage you to spend some time with them and carry this item as an item of old business for your next meeting. I'll pause there, Mr. Chairman, and the staff and I can take questions that you might have. I will stop sharing my screen, but I can bring it up again if needed. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Manager. I just want the record to reflect that Councilman Winograd has joined us as well. Since a lot of our members here this morning seem to be remote and not seated in an office this morning, I'll just call on people to see if they would like to ask any questions, and we'll just go through that way. So we'll start with Mayor Cantor.
Sorry, I can't. I'm just listening. Thanks.
Okay, no worries. Thank you, Mayor. Mr. Sweeney.
Yes, thanks, Leon. Matt, thank you for that comprehensive presentation. Really appreciate it, and love the thought process that is going into it, particularly like the efforts into providing additional assistance to small businesses. I think I think you, myself, and Mr. David and the mayor kind of exchanged texts about what was going on, and I think it was East Windsor who did something similar to this. I think that's something that we should definitely try to look at. I am a little nervous about how effective it can be if people have already, I guess, reached out to the federal government for assistance and received it. I would imagine just about everyone's done that, who is eligible. But I'd love to learn more about that process. I think the one thing that I just kind of saw that was kind of glaringly empty for me was my understanding with these dollars was that an investment in the community of children that were kind of left behind during this time, and how are we activating them, and what are we doing to really invest in them going forward. And obviously I don't think that it's on the town's side to really put forward these plans by nonprofits. I know that there is a plan to engage nonprofits on this side, but I think the one thing that I want to be clear is that I want to make sure that we're not just spending money on infrastructure. I think that we need to spend money on people that really were hurt during this time. I think that I would like to see if it's possible for the use of funds to the not necessarily who have demonstrated loss during this time, but are looking to innovate going forward. I think that's a big thing, because just about every nonprofit or business that existed during COVID, that wasn't in the home development sphere got impacted pretty negatively during COVID. And so, I think that there are a lot of people that are eligible, but I think what we need to focus on is how do we kind of spring forward in regards to helping our kids move forward? How do we get them re-engaged? Because this is a big problem of, I think there are a lot of kids that just stopped engaging in sports. Their parents kind of stopped putting them out there due to health concerns. How do we re-engage them? And I think that's something that we really need to focus on as a town, because we have such a vibrant recreational service, and I want to make sure that we're getting people back and back and healthy and kind of that healthy active lifestyle that I think that we all want to see with our young kids. So I think that's just something that I would like to make sure that we focus on when we move forward, and particularly with the goal. Also, I think we're simultaneously moving forward with St. Bridget's, and keeping that in mind. If we were to move forward with a recreational facility there, is there a way for us to use some of these funds to help springboard? One, obviously, I know the construction is a completely different thing, but the programming that could potentially take place there is something that I would like to see us look at and strongly consider. So, again, Matt, this is a fantastic blueprint. I'm really excited about where we're going. I just would like to add that caveat and like to see that a little bit more developed in here. And I know that this is just the beginning. So thank you so much for this very thoughtful presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Sweeney. Mr. Hart, did you wish to comment on Mr. Sweeney's remarks?
Matt Hart, Town Manager. Thank you, Councilor Sweeney, for your good feedback there. Just to speak to your point, some of and again, I didn't have an opportunity, or I didn't, because of limited time today, I didn't go line by line, but we do have some funding in place under the leisure and services category that would certainly enhance youth programming. We are proposing to totally renovate and upgrade the Hillcrest Neighborhood Outreach Center. Very, very excited about that potential initiative. But to your point, there could be potential use of this money at our new Elmwood Community Center, partnering with organizations like the Bridge, et cetera, any number of things we could do. So look forward to your leadership in that category. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hart. Mr. Winograd?
No questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Fay?
Yes, good morning, everybody. Thank you so much. I enjoyed the presentation as well. I need to clearly spend more time with it, Matt, so I can drill down and come up with some, questions or positive suggestions or what have you. I think it's very comprehensive. It covers a lot of areas. But one general question I have, if I may, excuse me, is, well, we have this opportunity and it is a one time and it is very big. And I think you've done a nice job of taking advantage of it and be thoughtful about where you want to spread the money to. And it's not just spreading it all over the place and not doing meaningful things. I thought it was very selective of where it's being applied, so it will have a meaningful result. But my question would be, how does this, how do we marry, I guess is the word that I'm looking for, potential grants, for instance, or how we got, we do get grants frequently, as all municipalities do. And we just got the one for St. Bridget's as an example. How would we, I don't know how to phrase this right, but we got the 25 or so $million from relief from the federal government. And then we do have the ability to go out and write grants ourselves. So how would you reconfigure grants, so to speak, or maybe even bonding? I don't know. I'm not sure what the exact sources would be, so that we could leverage the $25 million to go even further. Does that make sense? I guess I'm trying to figure out how all the financing sources interplay. Thank you very much. And then I do have a follow-up question, if I may.
Thank you, Ms. Fay. Mr. Hart.
Thank you, Matt Hart, Town Manager. Thank you for the good question, Councilor Fay. Yes, I think we would certainly, and we are proposing in a few areas here, how we can utilize rescue plan monies as almost a match for both municipal projects as well as projects coming from the nonprofit and business community. For example, what we are proposing here is to utilize a portion of the funding for flood mitigation, stormwater improvements, etc. That would enable the town arguably to provide something of a match to federal and state grant monies for the same purpose. One thing I wanted to say at the end, I'll say it now. You'll note we do not have any recommendations just yet for the 12 million in our county-based share. The reason we do not is because we're still finalizing those drainage studies, and I'm going to recommend that we use a substantial portion of this funding for some type of regional initiatives to address stormwater, flooding, etc. And then for the nonprofit and business community, one of our suggestions here would be to utilize the monies for a matching grant initiative. So a nonprofit or a business wants to do something that's going to benefit their organization and that is responsive to the pandemic. The town could provide a matching grant, 25, 50%, what have you. So I think the point you make is a very good one. How do we utilize this money to match it up with other funding sources so that we can take the initiative even further?
That's exactly what I was looking for. Thank
Thank
you.
you. Councilwoman Fay, do you have an additional question?
Yes, and I'll be brief. I know I'm sensitive to time as well. Thank you, Mr. Davidoff. You've mentioned the stormwater a few times, Matt, and I know that's something that a lot of residents are concerned about as well as us. I'm just wondering, and maybe this is more for Peter than you. I know we're still studying and coming up with estimates and things like that. I understand it's going to be pretty significant in terms of cost. Is there a way for us to sort of ease the pain, I'm going to say, of a big investment like that to maybe start reserving for that now? Because I would imagine something like that is going to be multi-year, big dollars, and we'll have to do our best to start funding for it in advance. And I just was wondering if you or Peter had some comments about that. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Fay. Mr. Hart.
Thank you, Matt Hart, Town Manager. Thank you for that question as well, Councilor Fay. Yes. So we had a recent presentation to our Community Planning and Economic Development Committee. We presented the most recent stormwater study. We are talking about a long-term project here, with potentially $100 to $200 million, very extensive, as we know, over a period of many, many years. But right now, if we could allocate 10 to 15 million, maybe a little more than that over the next couple of years, we can use that money for design and to help address some of our highest priority areas. So yes, we can utilize a significant of this portion of this money over the next couple of years. And recall, we have to spend it by the end of 2026 to really make some good progress in terms of a long-term multi-year initiative.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hart. So I agree, Mr. Manager, that we will keep this item as an item on the committee's agenda, and we'll bring it up next month with respect to the American Rescue Plan funding. Just ask my colleagues to please read the attached 5-page memo that accompanied the spreadsheet so we can have more substantive discussions with respect to the items that were listed. Thank you. Without further ado, we'll move on to the next agenda item, which is the special assistant to the town manager, the equity officer position. Mr. Hart.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Matt Hart, Town Manager. Let me just provide a very few quick comments and then turn to Mr. Ledwith through you, our Executive Director of Human Resources. So we are as a staff, we're very excited about this opportunity. Want to thank the council again for supporting this initiative. This position, as you know, we've been engaged in a diversity, equity, and inclusion initiative over the last couple of years. Our school district has made great progress in this area over the last decade. We see this position as serving as the coordinator for a host of related initiatives. And as Mr. Ledwith will talk about, certainly the position will have something of a human resources focus, but it's going to be much larger than that because equity impacts all elements, every department of our organization, all of our major policy decisions, et cetera, whether it's planning and zoning, public safety, public works, what have you. So let me pause there and through you, Mr. Chairman, turn the floor over to Mr. Ledwith.
Thank you, Mr. Hart. Mr. Ledwith, good morning.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, everyone. Good to be here. And as Matt said, we are very excited about this position. When we had talked about this back in the spring, when the council approved it, we had discussed at that time and still holds true today, diversity, equity, is one of the most important topics going on in the world today. And as Matt said, we spent the last year providing
Excuse me, Rick, you're buffering a little bit. I wonder if you want to turn off your video. We're just struggling to hear you.
I'm sorry, is that any better?
Now we can hear you.
Okay, sorry about that. So as I was saying, this position does demonstrate a deep organizational commitment to equity and will ensure that our focus on equity does not stop after the training. So this is, sometimes when an organization goes through various training initiatives, it can be, you sit through the training, and then you kind of move on to your daily duties. This position will ensure that that does not happen, that equity remains a focus for the town, for the community, for the organization as we move forward. And as the job market continues to become increasingly competitive for employers like us, candidates will want to see our commitment to equity and diversity moving forward. As Matt said, it's made a tremendous difference on the school side, and we know that can make a difference on the town side as well. Over the last 8 weeks, we've onboarded 80 new teachers onto the school side, and our focus on equity made a difference in bringing these folks on board to the school district. So we're very confident that this position will in fact help us as we move forward over the next 24 months in a job market that's going to be increasingly competitive. So everybody hopefully had a chance to look at the job description. As Matt said, it is a special assistant to the town manager, equity officer. You will see, around the state and around the country, this position is sometimes housed in human resources and sometimes it's housed separately. We felt it was important here that it would be a direct report to the town manager. It will have, we will work, obviously HR will work with this person, but our entire department will be working exclusively, all of our departments will be working exclusively with this person as well. But they will also be a resource for our community. So there will be a tremendous amount of work and support going on with our staff, our employees, with training and the focus on equity, but they will be working with our boards and commissions. They'll be a resource for the town council and our community. So we felt it would be better housed reporting directly into the town manager, providing that wide range of resource to the entire community. In terms of the recruitment process itself, certainly we're looking for feedback from the council on this job description, and we will tie those recommendations into our current description, and then we will look to actively recruit, as we move through the fall and then the early part of the winter, with a potential start date for sometime right after the holidays. We will use our traditional avenues of recruitment. Indeed, we'll use Connecticut CCM, we'll use Massachusetts CCM, but this position, it won't be your typical post it and pray that you come up with a good pool. We have connections and resources that we will utilize. As you all know, we brought a consultant on board last spring, KJR Consulting, and Kenya Rutland. He has helped a number of organizations throughout the country, not just throughout the Northeast, in creating and recruiting for these positions. So Kenya will be a tremendous resource for us as we cultivate a nice quality pool for this position. Certainly, Dr. Rosina Haskins will be a resource for us. As you know, Dr. Haskins is our Director of Equity Advancement on the school side, and Dr. Haskins connections as well. So we're very confident that as we move through the fall and early part of the winter, we will have a strong quality pool of candidates to choose from. It is a position that's become increasingly more popular, for lack of a better word. I mean, there are over 2,000 equity officer or chief equity officer positions open around the country. We've seen a big push on the school side right here in Connecticut. Boards of education around the state have, over the last 12 months, it has become a position that you will see frequently open up around the state. And we're starting to see more of that on the municipal side as well, with a number of these openings having been filled and starting to come up throughout the state. So, the salary range that we've established for this position, is in that mid 90s to low 100s. That is we feel is competitive enough to generate a strong pool. And we've seen, that range a little bit higher in the down on the Gold Coast, but I think in our part of the state, that will be a competitive salary to recruit a quality person for this position. I won't get into all of the details of the job description. I'd be happy to answer any questions, or we would be happy to answer any questions that folks had around the job description, or comments that you may have, suggestions, or certainly any questions that you had about the process overall. Back to you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Leathworth. I'll just begin with thanking you for undertaking this task. It's definitely going to be a very competitive process with so many employers and organizations looking to fill this type of position, which is so essential for day-to-day operations, like organizations and nonprofits and private and public entities such as ours. So I wish you the best in your recruiting efforts here. I'm certain that we will get an amazing pool of applicants, and I'm certain that we'll be able to, in the end, select the appropriate person to handle the duties and responsibilities of the position. I don't know if any of my other members of the committee have any questions or comments on this particular agenda item. If so, if you could just unmute at this point and ask them.
I just want to make sure we're time-wise, this is Mayor Cantor, just time-wise on posting, because I want to make sure that the council has a little time to review this description.
Mr. Hart.
Thank you, Matt Hart, Town Manager. If you would like to carry this item also as old business until your next meeting, we could certainly do that and then initiate our recruitment at the end of October or the beginning of November. In addition to the sources Mr. Ledwith identified, I would also like to see us post this on the ICMA website. I think, that would help us reach a nationwide audience.
Excellent suggestion, Mr. Hart, and thank you, Mayor Cantor, for your suggestion. I think that's very important that the committee and the council look at this more closely prior to us posting. So we will put this on the next agenda item. The next meeting as an agenda item, I'm sorry. So I think at this point, with that being the course of action, why don't we move on to the next agenda item, which is item D under business investment options for the pension bond reserve fund. Mr. Hart.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Matt Hart, Town Manager. Mr. Privatera, our Director of Financial Services, can actually take the lead on the next two items. That would be the pension bond reserve fund as well as our tax suspense list.
Thank you, Mr. Hart. Mr. Privatera.
Good morning, Pete Privatera, Finance Director for the town. If you recall, as part of the pension obligation bond sale process, we established a pension bond reserve fund. The purpose of the fund was to mitigate any year-over-year spikes in our annual required contribution. With respect to investment of the fund, we have created an account in Wells Fargo where our pension fund account is. And we had some options. I chose one option, but I wanted to discuss it with this committee to see if there was agreement or if you wanted me to go in a different direction. The three different options we have is, number one, we can invest the money in marketable certificates of deposit and government securities that are all fully backed and insured. You know, right now on a 1-year CD, we could probably get 25 basis points. The interest rate environment is very poor at this point. The second option that we have, which I'm pursuing right now, is basically it's the same process that the pension board followed when all of the pension bond proceeds were put into an account and gradually moved into the pension allocation model. That's you know, we're investing in bonds, short-term bond mix, and investment grade securities. Now, the short-term bond mix, most of the components of that bond mix are government securities, but there are some investment grade securities. The difference is that the yield on those is a little more than double of what we would get on the government-backed securities, but they're not all fully backed. There is some minor risk. So we're looking at, you know, 25 basis points versus right now our estimate is about 61 basis points. Again, these are very conservative investments, all investment grade government securities, mortgage-backed securities, but the yield is greater. The third option we have is basically doing an asset fixed income mix, which means we would be investing half of the proceeds in stocks. I didn't want to follow that path because if we have a couple of years of economic downturn and stock market as it has, you know, recently just taken a negative downturn, you know, that could impact the fund. And since we don't have money going into the fund every year like we do the pension fund, it would take a longer time for that type of action to require. But again, on the positive side, in our pension fund investments over the last 20 years, we've averaged a 6% return. Now, as interest rates increase, the investment strategy that I'm pursuing right now, the bond strategy, you know, we'll get a greater yield. I think in some of these investment options we have right now, over you know, a 5-year period, it's up in the mid to upper 2% range. Again, the way I approach this is our primary responsibility is to protect the capital, protect the initial investment of $26.9 million, which, by the way, half of it has been deposited in this account, and the other half will be deposited after the collection in January. So I wanted to bring this up to see if there was any concern about the approach that we're taking, if there were any questions about it. I just wanted to let this committee and council know what we're pursuing, and I'll take any questions you might have on it.
Thank you, Mr. Privatera. For those who can see a screen, it's been posted up onto the meeting as shared by Mr. Hart. Does anybody have any questions with the course of action that Mr. Privatera is recommending with respect to how we should invest the reserve fund? Seeing and hearing none, I think, Mr. Privatera, I think to model the exact same conservative approach that you've used in other instances would be a prudent and sound way to proceed at this particular point in time.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Would you like me to move on to the suspension of taxes?
Right, so that's item E, suspension taxes. I think you're looking to suspend about $300,000, which encompasses things on the grand list of 2017, correct me if I'm wrong, that are motor vehicles that have not paid their taxes for quite a few years, as well as personal property accounts for businesses. I don't recall exactly the mix. I think it was 180,000 on automobiles and 110,000 on business personal property. And if I recall from past years, it doesn't mean that we're going to stop making efforts to collect these. It just means that it's an administrative financial move that we do every year to take them off the active roll and put them in what's known as suspense status, so that we just move forward that way. So, Mr. Privatera, I think I tried to summarize it the best way I understood it, but you can correct me if I was wrong.
No, Mr. Chairman, you're absolutely correct. We're required by state statute to submit a suspense list to council every year. The only real difference here is that it's a 3-year uncollectible account, and this amount is a little bit higher than what we have seen in prior years, only because we caught the tail end or the beginning of the COVID crisis with this, and our personal property is a little higher than what we would normally see. But you're absolutely right. This doesn't negate our ability to go after and collect the funds. It just takes it off our receivable accounts. So yes, that's it. Thank you.
Thank you. I don't know if anyone has any questions, but I think this item is, since it's required under state statute, is more informational than really requiring a discussion. But Mr. Hart.
Thank you. Matt Hart, Town Manager. Mr. Privatera, this will require action by the council. We would put this on a future agenda.
Yes, Mr. Town Manager, it will require council approval. It'll go on the agenda for the next council meeting.
Thank you, Mr. Privatera. And I think my colleagues know that if someone does try to make payment, there are interest and penalties that are associated with the late payment. So those are additional fees that we will receive in addition to the principal amount still owed. So we'll have this on our next council agenda, Mr. Hart. Thank you. We'll move on to staff reports. That would be Mr. Privatera.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The only item that was not covered so far was a year-end projection for fiscal year 21. Although the auditors are still working and there may be some additional adjustments made before they're completed, I'm pleased to announce that our projection on a surplus basis is about $1.45 million for fiscal year 21. I am recommending when a resolution goes to council for action on the distribution of those funds, I am recommending that we reserve $400,000 for outstanding tax appeals. We still have a couple of significant appeals out there. And I'm also recommending that $565,000 be allowed to stay in fund balance which will let the town retain its 9.1% unreserved fund balance ratio. I'm also making some recommendations or identifying some options. Balance of the surplus, which is about 485,000. Council can choose to put it in the CNRE fund and fund balance for future expenditure. Also, another option is the utility services fund that that we we were a little aggressive with the last 2 years during the budget process. But a third option, which I'd like council to consider, is the possibility of increasing the fund balance ratio from 9.1% to 9.2%, which would mean an additional contribution of $301,000. I think that, as you all know, we sell bonds every year. And I think the fact that we were able to close out the year without using that $1.5 million in fund balance that we thought we would need, plus the possibility of increasing the ratio to 9.2% would be seen as very, very favorable by the rating agencies. Not that our rating is at risk in any way, but I think they would see that as a positive approach for the town trying to increase its ratio and make it somewhat compatible with other AAA rated communities in Connecticut. So again, good news. I'm hoping that depending on when the auditors finish, whether it's going to be the next council meeting or the following council meeting, but I will be preparing a report and recommendations for the town manager's approval to send to council on the allocation of fund balance. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Privatera. Do any members of the committee or councilors have any questions about the proposed course of action with respect to last fiscal year's budget surplus? Seeing and hearing none, thank you, Mr. Privatera. Mr. Hart, next item is the town manager's report.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Matt Hart, Town Manager. I'll be very brief because I know we still have a short executive session. I just wanted to highlight, and we'll report on this in more detail at the next meeting of the Community Planning and Economic Development Committee. We had a very, very successful job fair that we hosted here yesterday in collaboration with the Chamber of Commerce. We had over 150 job seekers come through the doors. We had a couple of dozen employers that were here, including various town departments. Feedback we've received thus far has been very, very positive. Some people were hired on the spot. So it's something we want to replicate in the future. I'd like to thank and acknowledge Kristen Gorski, our Economic Development Coordinator, Chris Conway from the Chamber, a whole host of town departments that participated in this, helped to set it up, etc., as well as the town council's support. So that's all I wanted to touch on this morning in the interest of time. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Manager. And I would concur that something such as the job fair is so necessary and essential in light of the struggles that both employees and employers are having with respect to the current job market. So it's really nice to see our proactive stance in our community to try to find synergy between employees and employers. Does anyone have any further questions of the manager at this point before we enter into executive session? Seeing and hearing none. Mr. Hart, I just have a question as to procedurally how we're going to do the executive session portion of the meeting.
Nope. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I would ask Ms. Verano and Ms. Reinheimer to elaborate. I think they've set that up.
Sure, I'll speak first. Thank you, Mr. Hart. Mr. Davidoff, you're going to first make a motion to enter into executive session in accordance with the language that's on the agenda. Executive session pursuant to 1-200 6B to discuss pending litigation, Wakefern versus Town of West Hartford. And then after the vote has been taken by the members, we will then exit this session and log into executive session. We should have all been sent already a WebEx invite for that purpose. We'll move into that WebEx session. We'll have executive session. I anticipate that we will exit executive session and then return to open session for you to take action on the pending settlement. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Ferrano. So without further ado, I'll move that we go into executive session pursuant to section 1-206B of the general statute to discuss pending litigation concerning Wakefern Food Corp versus Town of West Hartford, docket number HHB-CV-20-6061052-S, property address 245 Prospect Avenue. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Ms. Fay. All those in favor?
Aye.
Okay, we'll go into executive session, and there is another link, and we'll see everyone there.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Would you like me to email you the executive session link?
That would be helpful.
Okay, will do. Thank you.
Leon, it appears to be the same link. That's what I clicked on because I didn't have another one. Up to the second
Mary,
one.
she's sending us a new one.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Okay, sure.
You should have it by now, Deputy Mayor.
I believe we're all back.
Yep.
Okay, super. So, thank you for everyone for participating in the executive session. I would move that we accept a settlement in the matter of Wakefern Food Corporation versus the town of West Hartford. Docket number HHB-CV-20-606105-S, property address 245 Prospect Avenue, in the agreed settlement amount of $23 million for the assessment. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Mr. Sweeney. Is there further discussion?
Excuse me, Mr. Chair.
Yes.
If I understand the motion correctly, I just want to correct, it's the 23 million as the fair market value.
I'm sorry.
You said assessed value?
Right, I stand corrected. So amend the motion to reflect that the fair market value of the matter is 23 million instead of the
Second.
assessment. Thank you,
Second.
Mr. Sweeney, for seconding the amended version of my motion. Is there further discussion? I would just like to thank our corporation counsel as well as our assessment office for providing us with the details necessary to reach this settlement. Without further commentary, all those in favor, and that would be the members of the committee voting, Mr. Sweeney, Ms. Fay, and myself, all those in favor?
Aye.
Say aye. Aye. Anyone opposed? The motion carries unanimously. Thank you. Without objection, I'd entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Thank you. We stand adjourned. Thank you, everyone, for their time. Have a very productive Thursday. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Thank you.